1. Shaving the corners of the head. We may not shave the corners of our heads as the idolaters and their priests do, as Leviticus 19 verse 27 states, "Do not shave off the corners of your heads." One is liable for shaving each corner. Therefore, a person who shaves both his temples, even if he were to do so simultaneously and had received only a single warning, receives 2 measures of lashes. This prohibition applies equally to one who shaves off only the corners of his head and leaves the remainder of his hair, and to one who shaves his entire head at once. Since he has shaved the corners, he is liable for lashes. To whom does the above apply? To the person who shaves. The person whose head is shaven is not lashed unless he assists the one who is shaving him. One who shaves the corners of a child's head is liable for lashes. 2. Women and shaving. A woman is not held liable if she shaves the head of a man or has her own head shaven. Since Leviticus 19 verse 27 states, "Do not cut off the corners of your heads and do not destroy the corners of your beards," an association between the 2 prohibitions is established. Whoever is liable for shaving is liable for cutting off the corners. Therefore, because women are not liable for shaving, since they do not have beards, they are not liable for cutting off the corners of their heads. Accordingly, slaves are forbidden to cut off the corners of their heads, since they do possess beards. 3. General application of prohibitions. All the Torah's prohibitions apply equally to men and women, with the exception of the prohibition against shaving, cutting off the corners of one's head, and the prohibition against priests contracting impurity through contact with a dead body. Women are not obligated with regard to all positive commandments which apply from time to time and are not constant obligations, with the exception of the sanctification of the Sabbath day, eating matzah on Pesach night, eating and offering the paschal sacrifice, hakel, and celebration of the festivals for which they are obligated, for status of tumtum and androgynous. The status of a tumtum and an androgynous is doubtful. Therefore, the stringencies applying to both a man and a woman are applied to them, and they are obligated by all the mitzvot. If, however, they violate these commandments, they are not liable for lashes. 5. Women shaving men. Although a woman is permitted to shave the corners of her own head, she is forbidden to shave the corners of a man's head. She is even forbidden to shave the corners of a child's head. 6. Amount of hair to leave. The sages did not determine the amount of hair which must be left in the corners of our temples. We have, however, heard from our elders that one must leave at least 40 hairs. One may remove the hairs from the corners of our heads with scissors. The prohibition applies only to total removal with a razor. 7. Prohibition of removing the beard. It is customary for pagan priests to remove their beards. Therefore, the Torah forbade the removal of one's beard. The beard has 5 corners, the upper and lower cheek on both the right and left sides, and the hair on the chin. One is liable for lashes for the removal of each corner. A person who removes them all at the same time receives 5 measures of lashes. One is liable only when one shaves with a razor, as implied by Leviticus 19 verse 27, "Do not destroy the corners of your beard." We can infer that this applies only to shaving, which utterly destroys one's facial hair. Therefore, a person who removes his beard with scissors is not held liable. A person who allows himself to be shaved is not liable for lashes unless he provides assistance. A woman who has facial hair is allowed to shave it. If she shaves a man's beard, she is not held liable. 8. Mustaches. It is permitted to shave one's mustache, i.e., the hair on the upper lip, and, similarly, the hair which hangs from the lower lip. Even though the removal of this hair is permitted, it is customary for the Jews not to destroy it entirely. Rather, its ends may be removed so that it will not interfere with eating or drinking. 9. Removal of body hair. The Torah does not forbid the removal of hair from other portions of the body, e.g., the armpits or the genitalia. This is, however, prohibited by the rabbis. A man who removes such hair is given stripes for rebelliousness. Where does the above apply? In places where it is customary only for women to remove such hair, so that one will not beautify himself as women do. In places where it is customary for both men and women to remove such hair, one is not given stripes. It is permitted to remove hair from the other limbs with scissors in all communities. 10. Adornment as the opposite gender. A woman may not adorn herself as a man does, e.g., she may not place a turban or a hat on her head or wear armor or the like. She may not cut the hair of her head as men do. A man should not adorn himself as a woman does, e.g., he should not wear colored garments or golden bracelets in a place where such garments and such bracelets are worn only by women. Everything follows local custom. A man who adorns himself as a woman does, and a woman who adorns herself as a man does, are liable for lashes. When a man removes white hairs from among the dark hairs of his head or beard, he is liable for lashes as soon as he removes a single hair, because he has beautified himself as a woman does. Similarly, if he dyes his hair dark, he is given lashes after dyeing a single hair. A tum-tum and an androgynous may not wrap their heads in a veil as women do, or cut the hair of their head as men do. If they do either of the above, they are not liable for lashes. 11. Prohibition of tattoos. The tattooing which the Torah forbids involves making a cut in one's flesh and filling the slit with a color, ink, or with any other dye that leaves an imprint. This was the custom of the idolaters, who would make marks on their bodies for the sake of their idols, as if to say that they are like servants sold to the idol and designated for its service. When a person makes a mark with one of the substances that leave an imprint after making a slit in any place on his body, he is liable for lashes. This prohibition is binding on both men and women. If a person wrote and did not die, or died without writing by cutting into his flesh, he is not liable. Punishment is administered only when he writes and dies, as Leviticus 19 verse 28 states, "Do not make a dyed inscription on yourselves." To whom does this apply? To the person doing the tattooing. A person who is tattooed by others, however, is not liable unless he assisted the tattooer to the extent that it is considered that he performed a deed. If he did not perform a deed, he is not liable for lashes. 12. Gouging for the dead. A person who gouges himself for the dead is lashed, as Leviticus 19 verse 28 states, "Do not gouge your flesh for the dead." This prohibition applies both to priests and to Israelites. A person who makes a single gouge for 5 dead people or 5 gouges for a single dead person receives 5 measures of lashes, provided he is given a warning for each individual matter. 13. Gouging and gashing. Gashing and gouging oneself are governed by a single prohibition. Just as the pagans would gouge their flesh in grief over their dead, they would mutilate themselves for their idols, as 1 Kings 18 verse 28 states, and they mutilated themselves according to their custom. This is also forbidden by the Torah, as Deuteronomy 14 verse 1 states, "Do not mutilate yourselves." The difference between the two is that if one gouges himself in grief over the dead, whether he did so with his bare hands or with an instrument, he is liable for lashes. For the sake of idols, if one uses an instrument, one is liable for lashes. If one does so with one's bare hands, one is not held liable. 14. Prohibition against division. This commandment also includes a prohibition against there being 2 courts which follow different customs in a single city, since this can cause great strife. Because of the similarity in the Hebrew roots, the prohibition against gashing ourselves can be interpreted to mean, "Do not separate into various different groupings." 15. Making bald spots for the dead. A person who creates a bald spot on his head for a dead person is liable for lashes, as Deuteronomy 14 verse 1 states, "Do not make a bald spot between your eyes for a dead person." When either a priest or an Israelite makes a bald spot on his head for a dead person, he receives only a single measure of lashes. A person who makes 4 or 5 bald spots for a single dead person receives a measure of lashes equivalent to the number of bald spots he made, provided he received a separate warning for each bald spot. There is no difference whether one created the bald spot with his hands or with a potion. If a person dipped his fingers into a potion and positioned them in 5 places on his head at the same time, since he created 5 bald spots, he receives 5 measures of lashes even though only a single warning was given, for they were all created at the same time. One is liable for creating a bald spot on any part of the head, not only between the eyes, as is inferred from Leviticus 21 verse 5. They should not make a bald spot on their heads. What is the measure of a bald spot? A place on one's head the size of a gree which is free of hair. 16. Acting on intent. A person who makes a bald spot on his head or gouges his flesh because his house falls or because his ship sinks at sea is not held liable. One is lashed only if he carries out these acts for the sake of a deceased person or if he gashes his flesh for the sake of an idol. The following laws apply when a person creates a bald spot on a colleague's head, makes a gash on a colleague's flesh, or tattoos his colleague's flesh while his colleague assists him. If they both intended to violate the prohibition, both are liable for lashes. If one violated the prohibition inadvertently and the other did so intentionally, the one who performed the act intentionally is liable for lashes, and his colleague is exempt.